you on our show.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nkala, for having me. I feel honored that I've been invited to come and participate in your programs.
Okay, thanks very much. Today, you know, is on the 4th of November. And we know that in November 1893, the nation of Umtragazi was dissolved. We know you are the man with knowledge about history. If you don't mind, if you could tell us about the war that happened in 1893 between Umtragazi and the British.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Nkala, for your questions. Let me start by saying that this is the most memorable day in the memory of the Ndebele people. It's the most remembered day in the memory of Ndebele people in terms of the destruction of their nation.
Yeah.
Very much remembered to a point where people can cite each battle that happened during that time. This is the time when the kingdom of Umtragazi fell and was replaced with the BSA company kingdom. BSA being a company that was owned by Rhodes and the company, his friends, and it was linked to the British people who were operating from South Africa in the Cape Colony. So this day is the day when our kingdom, our king, our sovereignty, our land, our independence, dissipated. And it's something which we have not recovered since then. 1893, the 4th of November, marked the fall of Umtragazi, and that, sovereignty has not been recovered. That is very important because it means Umtragazi up to this day remains, a captured, colonized, occupied territory. It has never been able to get back to where it was, in 1893, the 4th of November.
Okay, maybe before we delve deeper into this, maybe if I can take you back a little bit in terms of what was the war about? What were the reasons for the war?
Well, the reasons are quite a number, depending on which point of view you are looking at this. From the point of view of the Ndebele,
yeah,
the cartel of Cecil John Rhodes, who organized the destruction of the Ndebele nation, the Ndebele Kingdom, they wanted to take over the territory that was ruled by King Lobengula. Remember that up to that point, 1893, Matabeleland was the only polity that was still standing, in South Central Africa.
Okay.
By then, the Bechuanaland territory under Chief Khama had accepted the protection, the protectorate system under the British. South Africa, the various kingdoms that are found there, had fallen under either the British or the Boer, colonial power. And then you also had in the north, Barotseland had also accepted the protectorate, system under the British. So you had the kingdom of Umtragazi standing right in the path of Cecil John Rhodes' plans because he wanted to expand British influence from Cape to Cairo.
Yeah.
So in a letter that Cecil John Rhodes wrote to Rothschild, when we speak about Rothschild, who we are talking about here, the wealthy families alongside the Rockefellers and so on. He wrote to them requesting for funding so that he could destroy and create a path from the Cape to the Cairo that was being, impeded by the existence of the Ndebele Kingdom. So he wanted to be bankrolled. So from the point of view of the colonizer, the Umtragazi Kingdom stood on the way of imperial designs, of Cecil John Rhodes and his company. But then from the point of view of Ndebele, the war was caused by, insecurity that was being posed from the east. Remember that King Lopengula saw himself as being the man in charge of the entire plateau, which you today call Zimbabwe. He may not have been the ruler of Mashonaland as such, but he considered himself to be the man in charge. Anyone who walked into that piece of land or territory had to seek his opinion. Remember, he also questioned why some people, entered into a deal with Kama without his permission. So he thought that all this land around him, including Bechuanaland, anyone who walked into that part of the country had to seek his clearance first. So the white people had walked into Mashonaland, set up base there, and prevented him from making visits there in terms of military raids. And remember, some people, particularly in the Masvingo region, fell directly under, the influence of the king, and some of them were keeping the king's cattle under Ogusisa. So if you remember, the one particular incident was that one chief there took the cattle that were under his custodianship and used them to pay off the telegraph wire that his people had stolen from the British in Fort Victoria. So when King Lopengula sent a force under Mgandana Dlodlo sometime around July 1893, when he got there, the British people were there, tried to force them out of that part of the country, saying that it did not belong to Lopengula, and they resisted that. So in the end, they shot Mgandana Dlodlo, which provoked Lopengula, and then he started preparing for war. But unknown to him, the British had all along been waiting for that moment that he will accept being provoked and start a war, which they believed they would win based on the strength of the arms of war in their possession. In this case, the machine gun is Kwakwakwa.
The Maxim.
Yes, the Maxim gun, you're right.
All right. You said the British South Africa Company, they came and went to Mashonaland first.
Yes.
So which year was that?
It was in 1890, in September. They raised the British flag there in a mountain, on the mountain, a copy called Harare, on the 12th of September, marking the British occupation of what is now called Mashonaland. And then the war that we are talking about happened in 1893, which was 3 years later. That's in Matabeleland. Now these people were now moving from the east to come and attack the Ndebele Kingdom from various directions. One, column of the army came from Salisbury, another from Fort Victoria, but there were others that were attacking coming from the south, that is from Botswana, led by, Captain Gould. Their intention was to converge in Bulawayo and then take over everything there.
So the ones who were coming from Botswana, Bechuanaland, were they black people or white people?
All the forces were actually white, but there were contingents of black soldiers, who had been recruited from Botswana, in as much as there was a black contingent of soldiers who were recruited from Mashonaland, who were coming into Matabeleland as invaders, in collaboration with the British to come and crush the Ndebele state.
Then when they had settled in Mashonaland, what triggered the war according to the wise? What was it that triggered the war?
Yeah, what sparked the war, what
Yeah.
triggered it was the incident of Fort Victoria, in which an Ndebele army went there to recover cattle that had been stolen by a Shona chief.
Yeah.
So then the British or the BSA or Rhodes or Leander Star Jameson had always been looking for an excuse,
All right.
to attack the Ndebele Kingdom and finish with it. Remember,
Yeah.
they said that it stood on their way of moving into Central Africa.
Yeah.
They said Lopengula was the only impediment to Central Africa, so they needed to get rid of him. Remember, there was the right concession.
Yeah.
The right concession purportedly, had allowed the British to come into Matabeleland and Mashonaland and do some mining. But then, remember, King Lopengula repudiated the right concession because it did not contain his exact words. Remember, he could not read on his own. So
Yeah.
some of the things that they included in the right concession disclosed to him.
Yeah.
So upon hearing from German journalists and Afrikaner, competitors to the British,
Yeah.
he decided to send an envoy to the UK to go and confirm and ascertain that indeed there was a queen who was in charge of the white people of English stock,
Yeah.
and that even some of the things that they were requesting from the king represented what the queen wanted. Then that envoy that went to England had indeed established the existence of the queen,
Yeah.
but then the queen did not accept that the actions of Cecil John Rhodes and his friends were representative of the crown. So when they came back, they told they reported that to the king, leading to that a concession being dishonored by the king. So the invasion had to happen because the right concession did not allow a legal occupation of Matabeleland. So it had to be a military conquest because the right concession had been rendered, irrelevant.
Yeah.
Although they'd managed to get a charter based on that, but because King Lopengula did not accept it as a legitimate document, they could not walk into Matabeleland and continue to do or act upon the right concession. So it had to be an invasion. So the incident in Masvingo sparked the invasion of Umtragazi, because there was no other way which was legal or acceptable or legitimate. They could have, come into Matabeleland except through conquest.
Yeah. And, some people say that Lopengula sold the country because of the right concession. What's your take on that?
The people who say that are either stupid or ignorant. I don't think they've read even the right concession itself.
Yeah.
The right concession, in my opinion, and in the opinion of any proper historian, represented the best deal by an African king. I am yet to come across a deal that was signed by an African which had so much, a potential for the protection of the kingdom. If you read the right concession terms, what you will discover there was that there was a desire by King Lopengula to militarize Matabeleland. It was not about money.
Yeah.
The only amount of money mentioned on that right concession is £100, which was meant to be used for purposes of petty cash by the king. When he sent envoys around, when he posted, adverts on newspapers. Remember, even the envoy that went to the UK was funded wholly by King Lopengula, entirely by King Lopengula from his pocket. It was such kind of money, like the one that the right concession was meant to pay to him, which he used for purposes of diplomatic networking. Otherwise, that's the only amount of money that's mentioned there. How can you sell a country on just £100 a year? Then the rest of the other items on that road concession are actually arms of war.
Yeah.
A gunboat, 1,000 rifles per month, which is about 12,000 per year, 10,000 round of ammunition per month.
Yeah.
If you look at the terms of that right concession, you will see that this is a clever man who wanted to consolidate his kingdom against foreign attack.
Yeah.
A gunboat, 10,000 arms of ammunition, 1,000 rifles. This was a man on a mission of, arming his nation against any foreign attack. So I'm not aware of any king who entered into a deal with white people where the intention was to get arms of war. You only hear about this now in the modern nations. That's why you can get such kind of terms. Otherwise, most of the chiefs and kings then wanted very frivolous things, not King Lopengula. He never sold anything. That's the reason why after the failure of that right concession, he put his arms, he put his armies on guard and guarded and protected his country from being invaded. And nobody fought as much as he did in the entire Southern Africa against foreign invasion. So how can you accuse a king who loved his nation so much and did everything in his power to protect his people, of selling out? Selling out to what?
Yeah. Okay. Then the whites are coming from Mashonaland, coming to Umtragazi or to Matabeleland to invade and to destroy the kingdom. Are there any notable battles that you could tell us about?
Yes, there were quite a number. The most notable are as follows. There was the Battle of Lalapancy, which was fought somewhere around Mvuma, if you know the Midlands. It was the first battle where the Matabele warriors discovered that in order to dodge or to minimize the effect of the bullets, you had to take cover. So that's when somebody shouted, "Lalapancy, uze lento ingakulimazi." So basebethatha cover because of that. So this was an army. This was in Sugamini, which was led by, I think, Mnondwana Chabalala. That went as far as Umvuma, trying to intercept the invasion so that all the fighting, kuthiwa impi idudulwa ingakangena ekhaya. So they wanted to make sure that the battles are fought before these people entered the real Matabeleland, where there was the main occupation of the inhabitants of the kingdom. But unfortunately, most of those places are plain fields with very little, vegetation. You would appreciate the fact that the Ndebele War system depends mainly on thickets or wooded places or, mountainous or hilly places. And such places are just plains. And as a result of that, the Ndebele way of fighting could not, register much effect on the enemy. So they were able to march right up to the Shangani River, where we experienced the second major battle when the whites tried to cross the Shangani River. It was a vantage point, because it means when they were trying to cross the river, they had an advantage of trying to attack them, and they did attack them. If you go to that place now, you will find that there are some memorial stones, that were erected there in honor of both parties. The white soldiers who died there, the Ndebele warriors who died there at the Shangani River. So that was the second battle, the Battle of Shangani. Once they had managed to cross, unfortunately, all that way right up to what you call Ntabazinduna now, Mbembesi. Again, there isn't much in terms of, you know, a good battlefield that favored the Ndebele warfare.
Yeah.
So we got to a point where they had to fight them in a totally clear area, egadade, endaweni ngamagceke nje elubala ungekho sihlahla ungekho ntaba. So they had to fight there. That is where the battle of Mbembes was fought. Gadade is also known as Mbembes.
Yeah.
And that was the fiercest part of the war, and it was a decider.
So which regiments were involved in those battles?
A number of regiments were involved, perhaps up to 8, 9, 10. But I know that those that occupied the epicenter were Ingubo, led by Fosikanye, and the Imbizo, led by General Mchana Kumalo. And then you also had Inga, Ujinga, Insukamini, Ihlati, Isiziba. They were all there forming flanks because they were using the bullhorn formation, where Imbizo and the Ingubo were the Ispaqa, and then the other regiments were the horns coming flanking around the enemy. That war is the war that decided the fate of Matabeleland. It was a fought right in the afternoon. I need to say something about that because I have heard rumors of conspiracy theories that General Mchana Kumalo sold out on King Lopengula by starting a war right in the afternoon and in a plain area. They say he deliberately did that because he wanted the Ndebele forces to be defeated. That is not true. If you know the distance from Bulawayo to Ntabazinduna, it's about 40 km or so. The reason why they had to be attacked in the afternoon is because if they were not halted, if they were not stopped there, they were going to march to Bulawayo and get there on the same day. So they had to be stopped by being fought in the afternoon in a clearing without waiting for those preferred areas for a Ndebele kind of warfare. So some people think that just because Mchana was related to Mngumbata and other people, Umhlaba and others who had been killed by King Lopengula, they were now having a chance to avenge the deaths of their relatives. That is not true. I've heard that theory, and I think it has to be quashed now and forever. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of numbers of the soldiers, of the Ndebele soldiers, what numbers are we talking about?
An ordinary Ndebele a regiment would have about 2,000 warriors, and here we are talking about 10 regiments that were involved. So we're talking about 15 to 20,000 warriors being involved here, and but I'm told some people estimate that 5,000 Imbizo soldiers or soldiers involved in that battle were killed, which is not true. The official statistics put it around 1,500. It's not a small figure. It's a big figure of the dead and the casualties, but it's not 5,000. It's around 1,500 on the Ndebele side. But there were also people who died from the side of the invaders. I can't confirm the figures as such, but they also were killed, obviously. Of course, you know, when you compare the effect of a gun, a machine gun in the form of a Maxim gun, I need to say something about the Maxim gun. The Maxim gun, immediately after its use, had never been tested in real war. It was the first time that it had to be seen to be effective in a war with Ndebele people. Never before was it put to use until there was that Anglo-Ndebele War, and its effect was devastating, as you know. So that is the war that was won by technology rather than bravery. Because when it comes to bravery, even the whites themselves were bewildered by the amount of courage that the Ndebele people showed there. Babe silwa bengabuyele emva. Bagwaze baze bayovala umlomo wesigwagwagwa ngebheju. And some whites, filled their diaries afterwards and their memos, marveling at the amount of bravery and pluck that Imbizo and Ingubo soldiers demonstrated on that day.
Okay. So were all the regiments of the kingdom involved in this war?
No, not at all. I think this was about a third of the Ndebele force who got involved here. Remember, the Ndebele army had just arrived from Zambia, Barotseland, let me say across Zambezi, where they'd gone on a massive raid there. And when they came back, they were sick with some disease that it acquired there. So they'd been quarantined. So that, those people were very clever. You speak about quarantine now when you have COVID-19 and so on. The Ndebele people then knew that if you came into contact with some diseases of some kind, the soldiers must not be integrated back to the people until they are fully, cured of that disease. So a large contingent of Ndebele soldiers who had come from across the Zambezi from a raid and came back sick could not participate in that war because they were still recovering from that disease, whatever it was. So only about a third of Ndebele warriors participated in that war. Amacheche, probably where you come from, did not participate, or is it Godloyo?
I come from Godloyo.
Godloyo did not participate. Amacheche did not participate. In Tunta, where I come from, they did not participate. Isipezi did not participate. Amapukutwana, they did not participate. These are the regiments later, if you know, in 1896, 3 years later, who led the Umvukela. Because they were still itching. Some of them actually thought that the war ended before they could make their mark. They thought that they would have, changed the course of the war if they had participated. So that's what I could say, that only about a third of the Ndebele military power was involved, not all of it. They actually felt that they were cheated rather than defeated in that war.
Okay, so you were talking about 1,500 casualties from the Ndebele side. Is it the full number of people who died?
Yes, the number of people who died. There were many others, of course, who got injured and perhaps died later. But those that were harmed by the Maxim gun were about 1,500, but definitely less than 2,000.
Okay. All right. So then Alan Wilson tried to follow the king. What happened?
The story of Alan Wilson is that once the invading soldiers had marched to Bulawayo and found it burnt down, and the king, having abdicated and taken the direction of the north towards the Zambezi, I'm sure you know that Shangani River is found on both sides of Bulawayo. When you go to the east towards Gwelu or Harare, you cross the Shangani River at around 100 to 120 km from Bulawayo. But then it curves around to the north where it meets the Kwai River. So in the north, it's around 300 kilometers or so from Bulawayo. So that's the direction that the king took as in his flight from, Bulawayo. So Alan Wilson and Forbes were given the task to pursue the king and catch him and probably bring him alive for him to face court action and so on, with the possibility of being sent to Robben Island, like they did to Cetshwayo and the other Zulu kings after they defeated them.
Yeah.
So he was sent there with about 50 or so soldiers who were supposed to catch the king. But then, unfortunately, when they got to unfortunately for them, when they got to the Shangani River, they decided that they will have one group crossing and the other will then cross the following day. So about 40 soldiers under the command of Allen Wilson crossed the river, and another contingent stayed behind. And then there was a huge downpour.
Yeah.
I must also remark that King Lopangla was a rainmaker, if you didn't know, of repute. He, during his reign, there was never a drought in Matabeleland. His powers of rainmaking were greater than those of King Mzilikazi. So it is thought that he used his powers of rainmaking to cause the Shangani River to be, aggressive, and it swelled up and it becomes swollen, and then it prevented anyone from passing from the southern part to the northern part. That's cutting off Forbes soldiers from those that Wilson had crossed with. Then in the morning, when the river was still impassable, Allen Wilson met Ndebele soldiers there.
Yeah.
And there was a fierce war that was fought. I think I would call this the Battle of Pupu, somewhere around Lupane. Yeah, about 40 white soldiers were involved.
Yeah.
And Imbizo had regrouped, Islat had regrouped, and the other soldiers under Chief Gampu were also there. So they faced with Allen Wilson's party, and they wiped them out totally. Not even a single survivor was left.
Yeah.
So it was only after several months that Maud, one of the traders in Bulawayo, went there to bury their remains. That's when he discovered that there was a fierce war. All the accounts about that war, white people get them from Ndebele warriors. They only got them from Ndebele warriors because there was no survivor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they consider those as the first people who died for Rhodesia. The people who because I'm sure you would know that in terms of war, if you don't get blood, if you don't spill blood, you don't feel that you deserve whatever you get. Some people must die for something, for you to have heroes. So they became their heroes. Later, they picked up their bones and interred them in the Matopo Hills. And I think they are still there up to today. Those are their heroes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But remember, that also angered white people.
Yeah.
That those soldiers were all killed, to a point where an inquiry had to be put in place to investigate how they died. It was then that it was discovered that their deaths could have been avoided because in his retreat to the north, King Lopengula had written a letter and also given some gift of money to the leaders of the invaders to say he desired peace. But because they continued pursuing him, it ended up with that tragedy where 40 or so white soldiers were killed at one fell swoop, and they regretted it. They wished they had seen the letter. Unfortunately, it had been stolen by two soldiers who also stole the money and the gold that the king had offered as a gesture of peace. So it led to that massacre of the white soldiers.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the pursuit of the king, you know, we have been told that the king just disappeared after crossing Shangani. What is it that happened after he crossed the Shangani River?
I'm sure there are many theories around that.
Mm-hmm.
There are those people who think that the king was actually captured and then shot at point blank,
Mm-hmm.
and that his bones are buried somewhere in Matopo.
Yeah.
I don't think that is a sustainable theory.
Mm-hmm.
There are those that think that the king committed suicide together with Prime Minister Makwekwe Fuyana,
Mm-hmm.
and then they were buried somewhere in Binga.
Mm-hmm.
I don't subscribe to that theory. The theory to which I subscribe is the one that says the king crossed the Zambezi River,
Mm-hmm.
went to Zambia,
Yeah.
and settled amongst peasants people,
Yeah.
and that his remains are still found in eastern Zambia around Chipata area. You know, where you find Nguni-speaking people there, or descendants of Ngunis there under Paramount Chief Mpezeni. I think I would rather go with that, because there are so many other effects that buttress that theory. I am told that in the 1960s and 70s, um, a contingent of people from Eastern Zambia went to the ZAPU offices in Lusaka
Okay.
and met with Joshua Nkomo, Tenjwe Lisabe, and others to direct them to the grave of King Lopengula. So some people amongst the Ndebele people know about that, especially people in ZAPU circles, they know about that.
Okay.
And then I'm also aware that sometime in the 1920s, there was a contingent of Ndebele people who were sent by the Matabele Home Society during the times of Tencent Hlabangana and others, who went to Zambia to pay tribute to the king of the Ndebele people, where he was laid there, just to go there to pay homage to his grave. So there are so many things that really point to the validity of that theory that King Lopengula crossed the Zambezi, went to eastern Zambia, and his remains are found there up to this day. And I've recently read an article by one Ngoni or Angoni, scholar who also testifies to that theory.
Okay. The other theory, some people say the king might have been killed and the head taken to London. What's your take on that?
If that was true, then we would know about it. I don't think the British were going to keep the head without any publicity around it. We know all those kings whose heads were taken to London. It is known. There was a closer chief, I think it's Sandile. His head was taken to London. It is known. History recorded that. So why would they make it a secret that King Lopengula was killed? Because it actually favored them to confirm that King Lopengula was dead. Because one of the biggest fears of the white people then was the possibility that Lopengula could still be alive. It was something which they dreaded. That's the reason why all his eligible sons who qualified to succeed him had to be whisked out of Rhodesia and be exiled somewhere where they would not be a rallying point for the Ndebele people's, uprising. So it favored them that he was dead. So they would have easily made that public if they had any proof of his death.
Okay, because some people say it was a criminal offense to kill a head of state at that time. So maybe they would have hidden it. because they were.
Yes, but they've done that several, I mean, several times and in several places. Like I've given you the case of King Sandile. They did that, and there wasn't anything that happened to them. So yes, it was an assassination if it was done, but they didn't care.
Yeah. Okay. Now we are at a stage whereby the Ndebele Kingdom has been destroyed. The king is nowhere to be found. Whatever happened to the king? Now we can say the Ndebele have been defeated. So that defeat, what did it mean on the nation of Umtragazi?
Yeah, I'm sure you will appreciate the fact that Ndebele people are a monarchical people. What does that mean? It means that once you take away or remove the presence of a king or a leader amongst them, they get confused, they get disoriented. So once King Lopengula had been driven out of his own kingdom, the nation got disoriented. They got confused. It took the effort of Queen Losgei Dlodlo, the senior wife of King Lopengula, to reorganize Ndebele people, reorganize the Ndebele nation, and give some semblance of leadership, working with senior chiefs as well as one of Lopengula's eldest sons, Prince Nyamande. Thus, the Ndebele were able to regroup and reorganize and be ready to fight once again to recover their lost sovereignty and kingdom. Hardly 3 years after they'd lost it, it was because of the influence and the organizational capacity of Queen Losgei, working in tandem with Ndebele chiefs as well as the eldest son of King Lopengula, Prince Nyamande.
You have mentioned that some of the king's children were taken out of the country to South Africa, I think. Did that serve any purpose that was intended by those who took them out of the country?
It worked wonders for them because the Ndebele people, even after the king had disappeared, especially during the 1896 war, one of the objectives of driving whites out of Matabeleland was to re-establish the Ndebele Kingdom under the leadership of Prince Nyamande. I need to emphasize this.
Yeah.
That Prince Nyamande may not have been the right heir to the kingdom of Lopengula. I mean, the throne of King Lopengula. But Ndebele people and the Ndebele chiefs understood very well that he was the only adult person then, because most of the king's sons who were born after he had become king were still very young, most of them less than 10 years. So they understood that there is what is called expedience. The only prince who was old enough, who had come of age, who had demonstrated qualities of a leader, of a king, was Nyamande, whose mother was Mkhwanazi, Ogampita, Umpita obezalwa ngulodada Mkhwanazi. So they wanted to install Prince Nyamande after, if the war had been successfully fought. I'm talking about the 1896 war. But then, as we know, it did not succeed. So even afterwards, there were many efforts that continued when the Ndebele people were identifying sons of the king who were, eligible to succeeding him. And then they noticed that the colonial authorities then decided to remove them. They removed Prince Nguboyenja, they removed the Prince Jube, they removed the Prince Pezeni, and the only one who was eligible, who was not removed, was Prince Dojiwe. For some reason. They became sort of lost until such a time that Queen Lozigay, the senior wife of King Lobengula, rose to the occasion, decided to fill the gap that the king had left, reorganized the nation with the support of Prince Nyamande and the senior chiefs, who were part of Umphakathi or Izikhulu zeNkosi Lobengula. Then together they worked and reorganized the nation and put it back on a sound footing for another war, which happened 3 years after 1893, which is 1896, Umvukela Mandebele. So that was through the organizational capacity of Queen Lozigay and senior Ndebele chiefs working together with Prince Nyamande. So yes, I agree with you that the impact of losing a king in terms of their esteem, their self-esteem as a nation, it caused it to decline. But once the void had been filled by the queen, it was reignited to a point where they were ready to start another war within 3 years of a defeat.
Okay. You have said the Ndebele people are a monarchical people. So maybe if you could just briefly tell us what was the role which a king played in the nation?
Yes, the Ndebele people are a monarchical people, meaning that in the absence of a king, the nation is absolutely naked. They can't even wage a war, because for a war to be waged, the king must do certain rituals and use a spear to point to the direction where the war must be fought. So in the absence of a king, it became very difficult for any war to be fought. Remember, it was very important for the Ndebele people to continue to engage in war. It is a tactic that kept them together for more reason than one. The role of the king was one, to lead the nation to a war. Like you would have a president today, I'm sure you know that only a sitting president has the constitutional mandate to declare a war. So was the role of the king. The king was a rainmaker. Ndebele people used to organize festivals such as Inwala and Itunga Lomthontiso and other such rituals where only the king could play a role and nobody else. It could not be replaced by anyone. So in the absence of a king, it meant that such ceremonies could not be held. Hence, we have not held any ceremony up to this day after the defeat of King Lobengula. It means that there are certain cultural rites, certain, activities that define us as Amandebele, which cannot be done as long as we do not have a king. Not only that, the king, like I said, was the high priest of the nation. The religion of Amandebele revolved around their king. He was the gateway to the ancestral spirits of the Amandebele, because he's the one during the times of Inwala, during the times of any need to intercede on behalf of the nation for him to speak to his ancestors, because it is the ancestors of the king who are the guardian spirits. If you are aware, Machobana, the father of Umtragazi, whose symbol is a three-legged leopard, which used to reside in the Matopos. Whenever there was trouble, whenever there was anything that was going to befall the Ndebele nation, a three-legged leopard would be seen in the Matopos. It was the role of the king to intercede on behalf of the nation to make sure that everything, went according to order. Not only that, the king was the highest judge. He was the chief justice of his nation, because he's the only person who could declare whether one lives or dies if there is a criminal case that is being tried. He was the highest court of the land. So you can imagine now, in the absence of a king, how a nation that depended so much, on their king had to live. It meant that that void, somebody else had to fill it. But how do you feel that without properly following all the procedures and protocols of installing a king? So that was the problem that happened once King Lobengula had disappeared.
Okay, you said in 1896, Queen Los K was supported by Nyamande
Yes.
in reorganizing the state in order to fight. However, my question is, wasn't Nyamande installed as a king?
As far as I know, he was not installed as a king. It was the plan of the Amandebele that once they had successfully driven out of Matabeleland all the white invaders and settlers who had come into their land, then they will move ahead and install Nyamande as the successor to his father. Like I said, Nyamande may not have 100% qualified, but he was still the son of King Lobengula. Although the Ndebele protocol or succession policy is that only a son born when the king is already a king, qualifies to succeed him. You would know that in the case of Nyamande, he was King Lobengula's first son, born of Queen Mkhwanazi, when Lobengula was still a young man and when King Ziligas was still alive. So using that kind of qualification process, Nyamande could not be ordinarily be installed as a successor to Lobengula. But most of the king's sons around 1890s, especially those that came from qualifying families or born after the king had become installed as the king, were too young. Most of them were actually less than 12 years. I think the eldest was Jube, was around 12. And there was Nguboyenja, there was Mpezeni, there was Totiwe. They were all too young. So the only one who had come of age and who could be expediently be installed as the successor to King Lobengula was Nyamande. So they had agreed as chiefs that they were going to bend the protocol and put him as the next Ndebele king. But that did not happen. As you would know, the conclusion of that uprising was such that there was no winner. It was a negotiated settlement where Rhodes and his BSA company agreed that they could not defeat the Ndebele from the Matopos hills where they were fighting a guerrilla warfare from. And then there was a drought, which meant that the Ndebele people had run out of grain. They needed to take advantage of the rains that came the following year. So there was pressure on both sides. The war was too expensive for the British, to continue it, and they knew they were not going to win it. When they drew up a budget, which was going to lead to the total defeat of the Matabele, it was found to be crippling, and they decided, no, the best way is to negotiate with the Ndebele leaders of the war. So the Ndebele is also under pressure because of the drought, because of the need to plant. You know, it was around October now. They had started in March. The uprising started in March. So they agreed to sit down and lay down arms. Well, we know that afterwards the British or Rhodes and these people went back to their own ways. That had forced them to take up arms. But for a moment, the war had successfully been stopped without a clear winner. So Nyamande could not be installed because there was no clear winner. Amandebele had not won the war.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why he was not installed.
Okay. All right. You know, many efforts have been tried to revive the Ndebele Kingdom or the monarchy. Currently, there are 3 or so, maybe 4, including the Moyo, the Lozu King. What's your take on that? Because there seems to be a lot of confusion.
Yeah, yes, there is a lot of confusion. It is bound to be like that, Mr. Gala, given the fact that we have gone for almost 130 years without a king. So when you try to revive a monarch or a kingship after 125 years, you are bound to have so many claimants, you know, some real, some, you know, fake, you know, coming up to fill the void. Yeah, so we're not surprised. However, this was deliberately created, as you would know, that Cecil John Rhodes and the British authorities that took over colonial authority over Matabeleland identified all the qualifying princes of the Ndebele and exiled them.
Yeah.
The princes whose names I've just given, like Prince Nguboyenja, Njube, Pezen, and others, were exiled to South Africa, to the colony, Cape Colony. Which is the reason why today, when you meet somebody like Prince Bulelani Lopemila Kumalo, you get surprised. Why is he speaking Xhosa? Why is he coming from Eastern Cape? Some people don't know that Njube was exiled to the Eastern Cape, which was then part of what was called the Cape Colony.
Yeah.
So his graves, I mean the graves of his ancestors, including Prince Albert, Prince Rhodes, he comes from the Rhodes side because Prince Njube had 2 sons, Albert and Rhodes. Okay. So Bulelani comes from Rhodes lineage. Okay, so their graves are found in Grahamstown. Up to this day, they are kept as a national monument. You can go there and visit them, and you find that here lies the remains of King Lopemula's descendants. They are still found there. So coming back to the clamoring and the competition by several claimants for the Ndebele throne, yes, there is Prince Zwitekalanga Peter Khumalo. He comes from the Nyamande lineage. I've already told you why Nyamande could not qualify. Yeah. But Peter Khumalo is using the fact that historically there was an attempt by the Indunas in the 1890s to install his great-grandfather as successor to Lopengula. So he's using that leverage, that if then the chiefs who knew the Ndebele protocol of installation and succession were ready to install my great-grandfather, it means I also qualify. But then I've explained that it was an expedience because the other princes were too young.
Yeah.
Now, after that, you would know that through some people who knew the Ndebele traditions well, they identified those princes who qualified. So it is in terms of seniority, it is only somebody descended from Prince Njube who could supply a successor to King Lobengula today based on protocol yamaNdebele as well.
Yeah.
And when you look around Inkato Idla Ubulelani, then you have people like Mkhwanazi who come from the Nkulumane side. They are totally offside. We can't even count them. The same applies to Stanley Raphael Khumalo. Not only, he's not even Nkulumane's, well, he claims to be Nkulumane's descendant. We will accept that, but still that doesn't qualify him because Nkulumane, there's a history around Nkulumane. He committed high treason, if you know, and it led to even his mother being, killed. He was also supposed to have been killed, but lucky enough, those entrusted with that the task decided to spare his life, and then he went back to South Africa and made a new home in Pukeng, in the Rustenburg area, where you still find his grave today. Yeah. So so we can't speak about Nkulumane. He can no longer supply a successor to King Lobengula's progeny. It is only from King Lobengula and from the King Lobengula lineage, only from Njube, because Nguyenja did not leave any issue. Pezeni did not leave any issue. So the only one who had kids who can now be traced to supply king for the Ndebele people is Njube. And then Albert did not leave any issue. It was only Rhodes, the two guys who formed Highlanders Football Club, if you know. Yeah. So then we move on to Mike Moyo. Well, Mike Moyo cannot be king of the Ndebele people. He can be king of some other nation, but I definitely not Ndebele people. Hence, his installation did not even have a single Ndebele chief, except Chief Kwebu, because the ceremony was being done in his area. The rest of the chiefs had come from Mashonaland. So he's their king, not the king of the Ndebele people. Perhaps you may be interested to know what the relationship of the Ndebele and the Lozi was. As far as I know, it is nonsensical for any Lozi descendant today to emerge and then claim to be, king in Matabeleland or anywhere for that matter. Because to start with, when people revive the Ndebele monarch, it is part of the package of the liberation struggle. The liberation struggle was fought in order to restore what was lost to colonialism. And the Lozi monarch was not lost to colonialism. By the time Ziligas arrived in Budlanondo, there was no Lozi monarch. There was no Lozi rule. He was not even responsible for destroying it. He found it already destroyed by those that came before him. It actually died a natural death, and those that came later to finish it off only finished off something which was already dead. Remember, if a king could be killed by a horde of army led by a woman, Nyamazana in this case, it means definitely it was no longer a strong nation. It was already ailing for it to be finished off by just a woman. So we can't be talking about Mike Moyo as king of Ndebele. Hence the confusion around him. Someone who claims to be king of the Ndebele, of the Lozi, who cannot even speak Lozi. I doubt if there is a language called Lozi. He speaks Ndebele. He dresses in Ndebele. Everything, the ambience and everything around him is. It means he's trying to revive something that never exists. He can only, copy and emulate something which is real. In this case, it is the living Ndebele culture and tradition of, kinship. That's what he's trying to mirror, because there's nothing called Lozu as far as I'm concerned. Because those people, remember, Lozu was a family of Moyos. It was not even a nation. It was just a family of Moyos who were the ruling clan. So there's no nation called Lozu. It is just a clan of Moyos who are called Lozu. So that dynasty, like others before it, who were not Moyos. I understand there was once a dynasty under Ndlovus, the whole, it dissipated through natural death. There was another one under Nuves, the Shokos, the Chibundule, it also died a natural death. Then there was a more, so we can't speak of the Lozu as a nation. They are not a nation, they are just a clan, a dynasty that's defunct. And in any case, it's irrelevant when we speak about the Ndebele nation. Then there is something that I need to point out, perhaps, is that it is not correct, especially for those that want to see, the Khumalo Ntungwa Nguni ruling family that came afterwards and became the new authority. So there are some people want to view them as if, they have a xenophobic perspective when they look at them. But mind you, these people came to fill a void in terms of the authority that was there. And the prophets from Jelele and others had actually predicted, not prophesied, that there was going to be a new order that was going to come from the south to establish the order in Budlanondo. I sat down with some old people like Grey Bango, Soul Kwakuba Ndlovu and others who actually shared this information with me, that they were told that because of certain transgressions that the rulers that were there before Mzilikazi had done, they were going to be punished by bringing in somebody else from the south to come and take over. So the coming in of the Ndebele or the Khumalo, the Ntungwa rulers had the blessing of the spirits of the land. Hence, they continued to work with them. It was actually not a colonial takeover. It was a confederacy of some kind, because politically it was the Khumalo or the Ntungwa who were running the executive arm of the government, but the spiritual affairs of the nation were still looked after by the Ngwali cult in Jelele, who continued to be, consulted by King Mzilikazi and later King Lopengula. You would know that King Mzilikazi actually sacrificed about, I'm told, about 12 beasts to Njelele. Wahamba wayoyikhunga ngenkomo ezilitshumi nambili. I don't know what that number signified. And then he made peace with the spirits of the land. And there was never any issue with him, And by the time when he came, the local inhabitants had been scattered all over, some of them living in caves because of the wars that had happened before. So he had to ask them to leave the caves and settle down, farm and do their normal business, and then continue to be part of, and then become part of his new nation. That's how he established the order. So you had a confederacy of the Nguni exercising political power, and then you had the Ngwali cult exercising religious power over the new nation. There was a complementarity, hence you had a situation even during the 1896 war, where the priests of Jelele were working hand in glove with Ndebele chiefs and Queen Lo's Gay. And what is very interesting is that there was never a time when the priests of Njelele actually said that after the driving out of the white people from Matabeleland, restore the Lozu king. They wanted a successor to Lopengula from his lineage, from his family. They supported that.
Yeah.
So where does Mike Moyo come in here? I mean, he simply has no place. So he's just coming to disturb the peace and tranquility, the unity of the people of Matabeleland by, fronting, the agenda of enemies of Matabeleland. He has no place in our, he has no place in our society, no place in our community. He's simply, a spoiler. We will only accept a king of Ndebele people from the line of King Lopengula, not Kulumane, not any of Lopengula's brothers, but Lopengula. And from the Lopengula lineage, from Jobe, period.
So from what you have been telling me, the rightful heir is Bulelani. Doesn't he have any brothers?
I'm not aware of any brother. If he has any, I will have to find out about that. But he's the one who was given to the family, to the Kumalos by the family. Just a piece of history. Bulelani Kumalo did not just emerge from Norway in 2016 or 17 or 18 or in the past 5 or so years. When his father was still alive, they traveled to Zimbabwe. And yes, and Joshua Nkomo was still alive. They went to Zimbabwe. As Peter Zwide Kumalo will testify to this. And then they were introduced to the Kumalos there. Tenjwele Sabe played a role, as she had always done, And the young boy, when he was still very young, was taken to Joshua Nkomo, was taken to Tenjwele Sabe, he was taken to certain key family members amongst the Ntunga or Kumalo people, and was introduced and given to them by his father. But no, when the time comes, when conditions do permit that the monarch is revived, ngininika umntwana nangu bayamazi, it didn't just emerge from nowhere. So it's known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting piece of history, which is hidden to many. So thanks very much for revealing that to us. All right, maybe to conclude our interview, looking forward for the Ndebele nation, what will it take to really restore it to its former glory?
It will only take a full restoration of their nationhood, of their sovereignty, of their independence. It means they have to break away from those forces that have colonized them, that occupy their territory, that exercise power over them. Remember that Matabeleland has never regained her independence since 1893. When other territories, after their different liberation struggles that they fought, were eventually decolonized by the colonial power, Britain, France, or Portugal, and so on. When it came to Matabeleland, when that moment came for Matabeleland to be given back to those from whom it was taken from in 1893, it was not given to Matabeleland. The independence of the Matabeleland was given to Zimbabwe. So Zimbabwe became a new colonial power over Matabeleland, is exercising a colonial authority over Matabeleland, perhaps as a proxy to Britain, because Britain is the last European colonial power which was supposed to have given back our independence to us, but it gave it to a neighboring country, which was Mashonaland. And Mashonaland has now renamed itself Zimbabwe, and it is exercising power over Matabeleland today without any proper legal instrument. Because remember that Matabeleland was ruled based on the rule of conquest, which was emphasized in 1918, Prince Nyamande and others with the Matabele Home Society, contested why Matabele still continued to be ruled by the British, and they wanted a political home of their own. And they were told that 48,000 hectares of land, which made up Matabeleland, belonged to the British Crown. So it belonged to the British Crown through the rule of conquest. That rule of conquest was supposed to have been removed in 1980, and the Matabeles take back their country, but it was given to Robert Mugabe and the ZANU-PF, which continues to run Matabeleland as a province when it's supposed to be a country. So yes, we can only regain our dignity, our self-esteem, our self-respect, and prosper as a nation only if we get back our country from Zimbabwe.
Okay. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think for now, maybe if we can leave it here, then maybe some other time we can discuss these things in greater detail. Today, I had really wanted us to talk about the war, the first Matabele War. However, there are many issues around it. So that's why we have spoken about this thing. Maybe if you have got something that you'd like to share with the people before we end the interview.
Yes, Mr. Nkala. All I want to say is that as Matabele people, we are our own liberators. And we must never forget who we are. And the heroic works of our ancestors, such as what was done or demonstrated on the 4th of November, 1893, must never be forgotten. We must continue to water that memory with revolutionary aspirations, so that one day, and that day will come, we will dance in the glory of their sacrifice, because they sacrificed to defend their sovereignty, their land, their king, their nation. So we must make sure that one day, what they could not achieve in 1893, we achieve it today. So let's stay vigilant.
Okay, no, thanks very much, Mr. Mkhwanazi. It was a great honor to have you on MPC.
I was also honored